The questionnaire involves, if you will, the boogeyman in the closet. The questionnaire involves political violence, the use of violence to overthrow an election or to deter people from voting or to take the Capitol the way it was not quite taken on January 6th of 2021. And we did a survey last year in which we learned that 20% of the public thinks a civil war is coming, for example. And we're going back to learn more about what they think about that, whether they think a civil war is a good idea, that we need one. We're going to be looking at various kinds of prejudice and bigotry, racism, sexism, homophobia, xenophobia, et cetera. Questions like, do you think violence is justified to achieve political objectives, such as to put Donald Trump back in the White House? And we asked that question in 2022 and learned that about 10% of the public thought that violence was justified in 2022 to put Donald Trump back in the White House right then. So we asked follow-up questions. We asked, so if you think violence is justified, would you yourself be willing to become involved? And the good news was that most of the people who thought violence was justified weren't willing to become involved in it themselves. Fine by me. But we asked questions up to and including, would you kill somebody? And people said yes. So
what percentage?
It's a very small percentage. It's about 1.5% of the population, 2% said they would kill somebody, and said on a questionnaire that they would kill somebody to advance political objectives. It's a really small percentage, but the population that our sample represents is about 260 million people. And a small percentage of a big number is still a big number.
Please pardon the interruption. I'm pausing the interview for a bit of math, and I'm inserting this after the interview was done. According to the 2022 survey, 1.5% of Americans surveyed said they would kill in pursuit of a political objective. 1.5% of 260 million people equals 3.9 million people. Now back to the interview.
There are lots of people out there who are willing to say, yeah, I'll kill somebody to achieve a political objective.
Willing to say it, but may or may not be willing to do it. People give answers to surveys that aren't necessarily true.
Which is, we structured the question. I agree with you. We structured the questions so that we only asked that question of people. We said, do you think violence is justified? If they said yes, we said, okay, would you be willing to become involved? And most people said no. But a minority of those people said, yes, I would be willing to become involved. I would be willing to hurt somebody. I would be willing to kill somebody. And yes, I agree that it could be that many of the people who told us they would kill somebody wouldn't actually do it if they were in the situation. And I hope we never prove that one out.
And your new questionnaire will take place, and those questions will be asked this year?
Yep, this year. And we're going to be asking a lot more, getting a lot more information about the people who answer those questions, because our objective is to understand what drives people to think that political violence is justified. Is it economic loss? Is it racism? Is it sexism? Is it belief in the QAnon conspiracy delusion? Because we ask about that. Is it Christian nationalism? We'll find out.
You may not commit violence yourself, but would you politically support those who did to save the country in your view?
Yes, we ask questions like that.
It's going to be fascinating to hear your results. And you've been monitoring the last few shootings, and I know you've been busy with other things, but you've been a part of and looking at the national dialogue on this. Has anything been shifting? Has the needle been moving one way or the other?
So I think there are two shifts that I see. And before I get to that, just monitoring events, The Nashville shooting, that awful tragedy at the school, is yet another case in which an extreme risk protection order could have made a difference. If Tennessee had had that law, there was a fact record that could have brought somebody to there was information that somebody could have brought to law enforcement, I think, and prevented that shooting from happening. But that aside, I see two things happening. One is in some places, the policy is shifting further to the right, as it does after every awful event. The Bruen decision is probably the most important policy-related event. It's a Supreme Court decision that, in a majority opinion authored by Clarence Thomas, basically said, for a gun policy to be constitutional, it has to be consonant with a historical record, and going back to the founding and the founders. So based on a close reading of that interpretation, a federal appeals court judge in Texas has found that the law that prohibits people who are under restraining orders for domestic violence from having guns, an appeals court judge has said that that law is unconstitutional because there's no historical record showing that the founders were concerned about firearms and domestic violence. And if that kind of thinking gets applied across the board, and this is not my opinion, this is the opinion of constitutional law scholars, it's hard to see, other than a few firearm violence prevention policies remaining in effect, because domestic violence wasn't seen as a problem in the 18th century by leaders. So it's hard to know where that's going to go. But the other trend is the one you and I have already talked about. And I think partly in reaction to things like the Bruen decision, and if I can broaden things like the Dobbs decision that have said to people, we need to wake up. There is a much broader conversation about the need for the public to take charge of efforts to prevent firearm violence than I've ever seen. And I don't think that conversation is going away.
That's a very important point. Going back to the storm in Congress, split opinions about whether the crowd was directly incited or whether it was a dog whistle. And I'm wondering if your new questionnaire we'll find out if it yields any kind of information on what kind of signals, political signals, people who tend toward wanting to use violence or approve of violence for the sake of change. What do they listen to? What do they react to?
That's in there. You can never do everything in one questionnaire. We left some stuff on the cutting room floor last time that we're going to go back to. So, for example, we asked people last year, do you agree or disagree with the following statement? In the next few years, there will be civil war in the United States, and 20% of people roughly strongly agreed. But we didn't ask the question, so do you think that's a good thing? And this year we're going to ask the question. Last year we asked people, how important is it to you that the United States remain a democracy? And actually a surprising percentage of people said, not so important. But we're asking a bunch of questions this year to understand what people mean by democracy. Last year we asked people, how much do you agree with this statement? I'm going to, not quite verbatim, but it's more important for America to have a strong leader than to be a democracy. A really pretty stark choice, at least so I thought. But others said, well, maybe by strong leader, they just mean somebody who's effective. President Obama was ineffective. We're not necessarily thinking authoritarianism. So this year we're asking some questions that would help us understand when people mean, say, strong leader, are they talking about an authoritarian, non-democratic, rule by fiat kind of person, or do they just mean effective elected leadership? We'll find out.
Violence or political change, American Revolution.
So we have some free text fields, and something like that came up last time around. And more broadly, whether in our survey or not, it does come up. This country was founded in an act of violence. It was reborn in another act of violence in the Civil War. And there is that quote about from Jefferson about the tree of liberty needing to be refreshed with the blood of patriots and tyrants. There are people, I've met them, I'm not hypothesizing. There are people who are living, waiting for that next watering of the tree. And the rest of us hoping that doesn't happen. But what part of us, what part of what the survey is after is trying to gauge how many such people are there and how strongly do they believe that and how willing are they to act on their beliefs?
In modern times.
Yes, next year. So next year is a federal election year, Mike.